I tell you, I'm just honored to be the Chief Executive Officer here at the Civil War Museum, and secretly I always want to do what Brett does. I just want you to know that. So usually when you're the Chief Executive Officer of a museum like this, you come out of two tracks. You're usually either the fundraiser or you came out of collections. You either had a job that had something to do with collections. And for those of you that know me, my background when I first started working in a museum was to be the curator. And then I became the collection manager, and no, I didn't collect deadbeat bills. That's not what I did, everybody. I managed the things like Brett manages. He is the one-man show here. This museum has one person managing all of the archival documents, all of the three-dimensional objects, all the photographs, all these things, which are massive here in the museum. So my interest has been collections all my life. And getting to be the CEO of the museum, I get to come down and secretly wish I was Brad about every day here at the museum. And anytime he wants extra points, he just comes to me and says, look at this great donation, or look what we found. Every day is Christmas here at the National Civil War Museum. And I think it's hard for most people to understand that. Now, Brett, I'm going to let you discuss the 2019 donations and the seldom seen treasures. But I've been here 8 years, and I think last year, and you can, since you've been here since the beginning, you can say otherwise, but I think last year was one of the best years we've ever had for donated artifacts here at the National Civil War Museum. Everybody calls us up and says, would you like to have these pieces? If it matches the collection, if it's something we don't already have, if it's in good condition, then Brett makes these calls to see that we have these added to the National Civil War Museum collection that's here. And Brett is a graduate of Penn State University as a BA in American Studies, and he has been the curator of this museum since the very beginning. So we want to suck out what's in his brain because he's got all that collective memory. Not only does he know all the collection, he's got tremendous collective memory here at the National Civil War Museum. So for the program today, new acquisitions and seldom seen treasures of the museum, without further ado, our staff member, our one-man show, our curator who puts tremendous effort in the exhibit and all this collecting, Mr. Brett Keller. Go ahead.
Well, it's great to see everybody here. This is really a big crowd. Usually I'm by myself in the archives or in artifact storage. You know, I'll be talking to, a pair of boots or something. A live audience, but it's really great to see you here today, and I'm glad you're taking such an interest. As Wayne mentioned, this last year was one of our best years so far as donations go. We have gotten, just in this last year, over 1,000 new artifacts. Letters, diaries, photographs, you name it. We've gotten everything from Colt revolvers to ladies' bloomers. I mean, it's really runs the spectrum, and we're just thrilled. And I'm super busy all the time, and I couldn't be more happy about that. What I'd like to do is share a little bit of this with you. I haven't pulled all the artifacts that we got this year because it's just a crazy lot of artifacts. And some of the artifacts that we get, I don't exactly know what they are. And I say that because this year we got a lot of women's clothing. And I did not study women's clothing in college or anywhere else, to be honest with you. And so I've been taking a crash course, and I've been relying heavily on Mary Beth. She has quite a bit of knowledge about antique women's clothing, and so for the last couple of months, I've, at least a couple times a day, I'm knocking on her office door, and she's probably about had it with me. But I gotta go where the source for information is, and she's it for now. But I do have some ladies. I do have some ladies from the Daughters of Union Veterans tent up in Du Bois coming down next week. to help me sort through some of these. So I'm going to figure out which of these dresses and capes and shoes and you name it, which will fall within the scope of our collection. And those we'll be able to keep and add to our collection, and the rest will be sent on to other institutions that fit the scope of their collection. So I'm really excited to be able to not only increase the number of holdings that pertain to women in our collection, because that's always an area that we want to build. We just don't have enough pieces that represent what women did during the war. They did so much, and you don't read about it in the history books a lot. You got to really dig, which is unfortunate because their stories are incredible, and we want to be able to tell those stories. And so this will give us an opportunity to add to our collection, be able to put some pieces out there in the galleries along with the soldiers, and the ladies were soldiers too. There were some fighting women during the war. They didn't just, sit at home and sew and do all that. They were clerks, they were farmers, they were business people, they were spies. I mean, it just goes on and on. So it's all very exciting. I mean, just talking about it, I get goosebumps because it really opens up a new chapter for the museum. Now, I have here a couple of the pieces from the collections that we've gotten in. We've gotten in 2 large donations of clothing, and so that's why we have so much to go through. But we have right here a couple of interesting pieces. This is the top for a dress. We have the skirt over there as well. And to my untrained eye, I look at the wide sleeves and the narrow waist and everything, and I'm thinking, yeah, Civil War, definitely. But we'll see next week for sure. But it's a really nice piece, and if it finds a home here, I'm very excited for that. But if we have to pass on it, then we'll do that gladly, knowing that it'll find a good home. Okay. We also have this one right here. This is a dress, and this one's really long, so I'm going to kind of keep it folded up like this, but it's a blue dress, which the label on it was an old label, said 1810 on it. Wow. So this may be a little pre-Civil War, or it may be Civil War or post-Civil War. We haven't quite got it figured out yet, but hopefully next week we'll be able to get a little bit more of an insight. But the colors are just vibrant. Whenever I see something like this that is from that time period, it just blows me away, because just like everyone else, I see pictures of the Civil War and they're in black and white. You see statues and they're marble or they're granite or bronze or something like that. It's all very dull and everything. But then you see something like this and it really kind of just comes to life. It's exciting and bright, and whoever wore this had their entire story to tell too.
Could we see the skirt?
Hmm?
Could we see the skirt?
Let me see here. I don't want to get it too. There we go.
Oh, that's long.
Yeah, it's really. Some of these you open them up and it just keeps going and going and going. You can definitely see a hoop under there, and the lining is really interesting as well because it's this polished cotton, but it's like blue. It's a blue cotton as well. The polished lining. So that's something I hadn't seen before, and so.
You'll have it up on the table when you're done too, Brad.
Yeah. Everybody will be able to come up and take a closer look at all of these artifacts. When I'm done talking, some of the other pieces that we got in those collections are shoes. These are, I guess they're kind of like slipper shoes. And what really interests me about these are the fact that there isn't a left and a right. I guess you just let your feet kind of
Mold.
work into them, and your feet would decide which one is which. This was before they had mass production of shoes. You go and have these specially made, I guess, or you would just deal with the generic left and right. So they're just really, really interesting. Just the shape of them and everything, it just screams out, 1850s, 1860s, and it's very, very exciting. Now, one of the earlier collections that we got last year was the artifacts of Sergeant Israel Mack. He was a sergeant with the 177th Pennsylvania. And before the war, he was a cobbler. He made shoes. He had set himself up in business and then set that all aside when the war came and went off to do his service. His wife became a milliner and seamstress. She would sew dresses and shirts and anything you need, and she would also do all the fashionable highlights, I guess, adding flair, I guess, to different pieces. And so she did that to support the family while Sergeant Mack was off to war. And a lot of what she made was donated to the museum as well. There's a family in Texas who are his descendants who, for the last 6 to 8 months, about every month, they're sending me another big, huge box full of stuff. And we've been very fortunate because it's a really nice mix of the equipments that the soldier wore as he went off to war, and the materials that his wife used to support the family while he was gone. And then when he came back, he started up making shoes again. They sent his tools, his shoemaking, cobbler tools, which is just very cool. It really tells a complete story. I mean, it's just amazing. From before the war, what was going on when he went off to war, what they had to do to make that adjustment, and then what they did after the war. She continued on as a seamstress and milliner, and he continued on as a cobbler. We actually have a pair of boots that he made. They're kind of in fairly rough shape right now, after 150 years or so, but they're really still quite good. And it just really lets us tell the story of what veterans did after the war, not just their wartime service, but their everyday lives as veterans, and how they went back home and put their politics and their angers aside and became productive citizens, and how their wives supported them when they needed to. And after the war, they didn't just say, well, I can rest on my laurels and, he's back, he can support us. No, they continued on. The hard work continued on, and they bore it well. And this tells that story, and we're very excited to be able to tell it. This greatcoat right here, it's an enlisted infantryman's greatcoat. This belonged to Sergeant Mack. I'm still working with the family to figure out what happened here. We'll get his records. I don't know if that was a wound or maybe he just snagged it on a wagon or something. We'll see. Hopefully it'll be something interesting to add to the story. But just to have an original greatcoat is really quite an impressive donation. Those just don't come around that often, but when they do, they're very imposing to look at. They really do tell a great story. We also have his cobbler's apron. So we got a little bit of everything from these folks, and that's just fantastic. It is just really, really wonderful. I mean, you can see all the marks and all the dirt and the dyes and everything else that he worked with right here on this apron. So it's just a fantastic collection. I think so far they have sent us 165 different artifacts pertaining to Sergeant Mack. and his family. And that number keeps growing. so we're excited to see where that goes. Now another group that we got in that was also very, very exciting. Good for us, unfortunately for the Historical Society of Wheaton, Illinois. Not so good for them. They had to close down. Unfortunately, their finances didn't add up, and they couldn't keep going. But they wanted to do the right thing. They didn't just sell off everything. They made sure that those artifacts that they had in their history center went to the right homes, and that's super important because if things are just sold off, obviously that history's lost. They get divided up, and the whole thing, and it's just awful. But they did the right thing, and they contacted us about their Civil War collection. They had a whole collection about Wheaton in the war, not just the war, but the history of that town. But they did have a fairly substantial Civil War collection. A lot of it was centered around Captain Henry Chester. He was a captain in the 2nd Ohio Cavalry during the war, and they had a lot of his artifacts, photographs. He had several photograph albums equaling close to 200 small carte de visites. We had some of his military equipment and a lot of the letters, the correspondence that he wrote during the war. I didn't bring the letters down, but I did bring one piece from the collection, which, earlier on today when we were over in the temporary gallery looking at the new exhibit, Wayne asked me what my favorite artifact from that exhibit was. And, I was buckling under the pressure trying to figure out what it was. And, I said, I think General Grant's camp spoon is really cool. Just that it's a gold-plated, engraved camp spoon that was given to him by President Lincoln. It was part of a mess kit. So I'll tell you what one of my favorite artifacts is from this particular acquisition from Captain Chester in the Wheaton History Center. And that's this right here. It's his holster. Now, what's neat about this, normally I'd be really pleased if there was a Colt or something in here. Maybe a Remington, that'd be okay too. But for this particular piece, this has a really great story behind it. He was with the 2nd Ohio Cavalry. They had been attacked, kind of a surprise attack by the enemy. They weren't prepared for it. He was leading a small detachment. And the Confederates all of a sudden come over the rise. Confederate cavalry, they're outnumbered. And so they decide discretion is the better form of valor, or however that saying goes, I don't remember. But they, beat a hasty retreat. Well, he was firing as he was retreating, but his horse stumbled or something along those lines, and he fell off his horse, and he got captured. They took his revolver away and anything else of value. They were going to take his horse away, but suddenly his detachment decided they weren't going to leave their captain behind, and so they came back around and gave him the opportunity to escape. Now, they didn't have time to just stop and say, hey, are you okay, or whatever. They were chasing these Confederates. Okay, so he was just standing there, and as he was walking back towards the turnpike where they had been chased from, a Confederate cavalryman approaches him, has his carbine pointed right at him, and he's thinking, I was free for a minute, now I'm a prisoner again. Well, he decided that he was just going to bluff his way out of this as best he can. And so his revolver was on his belt. And what he did was he took the empty holster and he just swiveled it on his belt and basically said, you know, surrender, you know, I got you covered or whatever, and, you know, don't make another move or I'm going to shoot you. And the Confederate dropped his carbine and surrendered. And immediately afterwards, he goes up to the Confederate, grabs his carbine, and now has an actual weapon, and he starts laughing. And he tells the Confederate that, yeah, this is an empty holster. And, you know, he said the Confederate took it with good humor. I seriously doubt that. But I guess it makes a good ending to the story, a happy ending, not so much for the Confederate. But this is the holster. And I guess if you think about it, looking at the end of that, you know, I don't want to take the chance that there's not something a little more deadly in there. So this is just a fantastic piece that tells a really nice story there. I do have one piece here that was donated to us with a lot of the clothing in. It's been driving me nuts for the last month or so, and I've been trying to find out anything about it. And Wayne, if you could just kind of pass this around. And I want everybody in here to
Audience identification. You want them to help?
Yeah, try and help me out. See if you can figure out what that badge is for. It's got a U.S. Eagle on it, and it's got a sort of a shield with the stars and stripes on it. So it's definitely U.S. And it's got the letters CG on it. Now, I thought it was Coast Guard, but I haven't been able to find anything on it. So if you kind of can tell what it is, I think it's from around 1906, something like that. If you have any idea, I'd love to know. Although it may not fit into our collection, I'd love to be able to send it where it belongs. We got in a couple months ago some newspapers. A lady sent us about 10 interesting newspapers. Can you hear me in the back? Oh, I'm sorry.
Possibly a prison guard?
Possibly, it could be. CG, I don't know if that's like Congressional Guard or something.
It could be like a county, like the Columbus County or Columbus, Georgia County.
Yeah, it looks like a federal badge, you know, with the eagle and the U.S. shield and everything. It's got 13 stars on it. So it's a tough one. But hopefully...
Constabulary Guard?
I don't know, that sounds pretty English. I don't know. Maybe. It could be. I don't know if any self-respecting Englishman would put the stars and stripes on their hat.
Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Philadelphia maker, too.
Yep. So as I was saying, recently we got in a bunch of newspapers. They were the New York Tribune. And they have all sorts of different titles. They're from the war years. All of them, except for this one. And what makes this really neat is this is from 1857. And as I was, looking at this, I just decided to see what was going on in 1857. And in the middle of the newspaper, there is the Dred Scott case. So this is actual firsthand reporting of what was going on with the Dred Scott case. And it's just things like that. You just never know. I don't even know if the person who donated these realized that there was something so historical in this particular paper. I mean, all the other ones are really tremendous as well. They're all wartime newspapers and everything. But the Dred Scott case, obviously, that's a really big deal. Mm-hmm. And, just to have an original piece like that and to be able to read it just like they did when it was happening. Yeah. It's just another example of the incredible pieces that we have in the collection. And, this will become part of the collection. We'll keep the original in our map case in the dark, but we will scan it so that we'll be able to allow people to come in and see things like this. And that's really very exciting, very exciting. Now, recently we also got in these 4 journals. These are all handwritten journals.
You take one.
Yeah, take one around as an example. And they were
All hand
Oh
done.
my gosh.
they were written by Frederick Swift. He was a brevet brigadier general during the war, and he earned the Medal of Honor during the war as well. He was very good about writing things down during the war. He actually, I believe, he rewrote from his journals right after the war, but it's all in his own hand, and just another fantastic piece that we're thrilled to have. Really, very, very exciting stuff. A lot of the letters that we get in come right from the families who donated, and that means that the majority of them have not been read since probably the Civil War. You know, a lot of families will call me and say, we have these letters, they were handed down to me. I don't really know too much about what's in them or anything like that, but if you're interested, you know, I'd be happy to donate them to the museum, that kind of thing. So we have a lot of letters that are brand new research material, literally probably read for the first time since the Civil War, for all I know. We have right here 2 boxes that belong to a Charles Burley Hambleton. He was with the 97th Pennsylvania. He was a young man, a corporal. There's actually a picture of him. You can pass that around if you want, right there. And we had donated to us recently 135 of his letters. And what's really neat is this is the kind of donation that just sort of happens. It's not, you know, like a lot of times I'll talk to potential donors for, you know, weeks or months or even years before we actually ever see the donation or anything like that, which is fine. We're not going anywhere, so we can wait. But in this case, we had a gentleman stop by the museum, and he said, well, I have, you know, 150 or 100 or whatever it is, letters from the Civil War, originals, and I want to donate them because they should be in a museum. And so just on that particular day, suddenly we have 150 more letters in the museum. Wow. And again, these letters have not been read or touched. He didn't have any idea what was really in them. And so we have not only the letters, but the envelopes that they were mailed in. I mean, the whole everything. So this basically is his entire military career in these 2 boxes. And, you know, I haven't had a chance to go through these. So, you know, it's probably going to be one of our volunteers who eventually transcribes these and gets to uncover all of this super interesting history. But, you know, as members of the museum, you know, if you guys at any time want to come by, make an appointment, I'd be more than happy to, you know, pull these out for you if you want to just read some original, very new, fresh material. You can do that as members. That's one of your...
The 6th floor.
Yes, I'll get to that.
What part of Pennsylvania was he from? What part of Pennsylvania was he from?
Let me see. Actually, it might be on that.
Philadelphia.
Was it Philadelphia? The 97th?
Yeah.
Okay.
But he only goes in 64.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody asked who the journals were. It's Frederick W. Swift, 17th Michigan,
Yeah.
which is a unit that's from west of Detroit. And we have a backpack of someone killed at Antietam of that exact unit.
That's right.
So what's really nice is you can get some different things, right,
Yeah.
Brett? You can
We quite often get artifacts that sort of correspond with other artifacts that we get. A couple of years ago, we got a sword from the 26th Pennsylvania militia. Captain James Elder was his name. He was local to Harrisburg. His house still stands. It's the oldest house in Harrisburg. It's over there, just over the hill. There we go. That's the name of the street, but it's a colonial house. And about a month after we got that sword, we got another sword, completely unrelated. This came from the Midwest, and it was the sword of his first sergeant. I mean, that just gives you the chills, you know? It's like you get this sword from the commanding officer of a militia company, from somebody who doesn't live anywhere near here, you know, and then the next month we get his first sergeant's sword. It's just, and the really funny thing is that first sergeant, when you stand in the observatory at the northern end of the building, you can see the cemetery where he's buried. Yeah, so I mean, just really cool local history and national history here at the museum. And you just never know what's going to kind of shake out. Wayne, you want to sort of just walk around with this letter and let everybody kind of see what this looks like?
Of course, I may not come back.
And yeah, on the information sheet about Sergeant Hamilton, he did enter in 1864. These were soldiers that were still being enlisted right at the end of the war. I mean, they were basically in say, February of 1865, and they got sent to the front so fast that they were in several battles. You know, you still had you know, the whole Appomattox campaign to go through. So, you know, even if they were just a few months in the war, they probably still witnessed great things, amazing historical things. And, you know, even just a few days in the Army, they have a story to tell, and we're here to tell it. Some of you may have noticed this large painting here. This is Captain John Wilson. He was an infantry captain with the Pennsylvania Regiment. For some reason escapes my memory right now. But he served during the war, the second half of the war, I believe. And he was mortally wounded at Petersburg during the final breakthrough. And he actually died in the hospital on the same day that President Lincoln died, on the 15th of April, 1865. We got this from his great grandniece, and it's more than likely that his father, who was a preacher, I'm not sure which denomination, but he ran a small church out in Washington, or Fayette County, Pennsylvania, out west. And the captain is buried in the church's cemetery out there. So it's just a really wonderful piece. You know, it was probably done by, it might have been an itinerant artist, just a traveling artist, or something like that. Unfortunately, it's not signed. You know, I wish we could find out who actually did it, but it's really a fantastic piece. You know, the face and the hands have a little bit of crackling in it, so, you know, it gives it that old look, and we're very fortunate to have this. The folks who donated this actually have his uniform and his sword, and they're going to be donating that as well. So we'll not only have his likeness, but a couple of really nice pieces as well. So we're very, very excited about that. A lot of the artifacts that we get are photographs. I mentioned that we get a lot of carte de visites, and these albums right here, there's two of them.
I'll take one around if you want.
Okay, yeah. We'll do that.
Yeah. Which one do you want to talk about, and which one do you want me to take? This one?
Yeah, that's the Chester one there. So
Okay.
you can take that.
Guy from the 2nd Ohio Cavalry?
Yeah, I think all those are from his albums.
Okay.
They're small. Wayne's going to bring one of the albums around, actually from Captain Chester, who I was talking about earlier, from his collection. But we have literally thousands of these small photographs in the collection, and And it's just fantastic. Carte de visites were small, kind of like, almost like calling cards. Enlisted soldiers could afford to have them made. You could get a whole bunch relatively cheap. You could send them home to friends and family. And a lot of them are signed. A lot of them are identified. And what's really exciting is I think, is it the Civil War Preservation Trust who is working on the facial recognition, or is that the Center for Civil War Photography? I think it is, yeah. The Center for Civil War Photography is working with facial recognition for Civil War photographs. So they're building up a database. So eventually, we'll be able to take an unidentified soldier and take a picture of it, send it digitally to them, and they might be able to tell us who it is. I mean, it's really exciting. That's going to open up a whole new series of stories that we can tell. Once you identify someone, you know where they've been, you know which regiment they were in, and it just goes on, and it opens up a whole exciting can of worms there. Let's see, I think I've covered just about everything. Maybe a couple of, you know what? I did want to show you this one thing. For those of you who have been on the behind-the-scenes tours, you might have seen this, maybe not. I'm originally from Vermont, and I love Vermont. I mean, it's a great state, Pennsylvania's great, too, don't get me wrong. I love Pennsylvania, definitely. But I'm from Vermont, always be a Vermonter. So whenever we get something in that pertains to Vermont, I get very excited. Wow, I had ancestors who fought in the war, who died in the war, and I'm very, very proud. But I don't want my head to get too big. So a few months ago, I was on eBay, and I saw this, and so I bought it for the museum. And this, it says here, which is hard to believe, but this is a descriptive list of drafted men who failed to report in the 1st District of Vermont and are deemed deserters from the draft. I know, I can't believe it. Vermonters can do no wrong in my eyes. So I figure I'll buy this, I'll donate it to the museum, and it'll keep me humble.
You didn't find a relative on it, huh?
Yeah. So
Good question.
You can come up and take a look at it close up after I talk.
That's an excellent question.
They would have published those names.
They probably would have too, but this is a broadside. They would have posted this probably in like the post office.
Have you checked to see if any of them are your relatives?
Are there any Kellys on there? Hang on a second.
Oh, you didn't look at that?
I did. I know there is. But no relation.
What about your mother's side?
No, they're from Connecticut. They're all okay. Yeah, there's one Kelly here. He was a quarryman, worked in the marble quarries. I guess he didn't want to give all that up. So, but yeah, I don't know who he was, but no relation to this guy. Okay, so there we go. We also have a series of letters from a hospital steward, Alvaro. Let me see here. His name is Alvaro Merrill was his name. He was a hospital steward. And what is neat about this collection is it has not only his letters from when he was in the service, but also letters from after he was in the service. And he was from New England, had relatives in Vermont, which is very cool. And it talks about getting out of the service and kind of adjusting, deciding what he's going to do. His father was a pharmacist. He kind of naturally fell into that. I think he later went into mercantile, that type of thing. But he talks about different areas of New England that he went to after the war as he's trying to figure out what to do with his life. And it's just really exciting because, you can literally follow on Google Maps or a regular map and see where he was, what streets he walked down, what buildings he was talking about, what harbor he was, out fishing in, that type of thing. So, it's not all war stories and action, but it's still very interesting. All of these pieces, everything that we get tells a part of that story. And this last year was a fantastic year, and we have every hope that this coming year will be just as fantastic. And I hope to see all of you again here next year, so I can give you another update. Because I can't thank you enough for supporting the museum.